And again, like I said, it's something where it's the least amount of restrictions, but it's also the most responsibility of most of the other home ownership styles because you own all of that land and you own the entire entity, the entire house and everything else. If anything goes wrong with any of those things, it's on you to fix, right? If there's something in the yard, right, there's a tree or something that is causing issues with the root system, or let's say, for example, there's problems or defects or issues with your siding or something on the exterior of the home, all of those things that could happen, those are all your responsibility when you have that type of ownership style. And so it can be more expensive. Welcome to the Home Goals Podcast, the ultimate guide for turning your home goals into a reality. I'm your host, Derek Thornton. Join us as we navigate the twists and turns of obtaining a home. We'll be offering expert tips, helping you avoid pitfalls, and championing your journey towards that cherished place to call home. In this week's episode, we're going to be talking about the different types of homes that you may want to purchase. There's all different types. We're going to go over the four main types of homes, talk about how they're owned, talk about the responsibilities that are in place for each of them, and all the other pros and cons that you may want to consider, with affordability still being very much an issue, as well as inventory also being still relatively low compared to where we needed to be to kind of get the market back. A lot of people are having to reconsider the type of home that they always wanted, right? They might say, well, now due to prices, I may have to consider a different type of ownership style or a different type of home than I originally envisioned, as well as builders out there, right? A lot of them, especially builders who are building properties that are affordable for first-time home buyers, most of those properties are changing the style and the size of the homes and lots and everything that they offer. And so we're going to talk all through the different types. We're mainly going to talk through the four main types, right? So you have attached, you have detached, you have condo, and then you also have manufactured homes, right? And so we're going to go break down each one of those so you can get a feel of what they have to offer and certain things that you may want to consider when you're looking at these first types of homes, right? So the first one, detached, that is the most popular one. That is often the single family home, or you hear it called the single family detached. That is a standalone home that is off by itself, its own entity. It's not attached to anything whatsoever. And those homes, like I said, tend to be the most popular. They usually have a little more land that they're on, and the ownership style is different. Right. So what I mean by that, if you look at the land that house sits on, not only do you as the homeowner own the actual house itself, but you also own the land that it sits on. And assuming you haven't sold away the rights to drill on the land or anything like that, that also means by default that you own the land underneath where the house sits, right? So you own that land all the way down to the core of the earth, right? So if you were playing around the backyard one day and you dug up some oil or found some gold back there, that is yours to keep, right? So you own all of that. You also own the airspace, right? So all the way up to the heavens above and down to the ground below, you own that space. That is what is typically in place with an attached style ownership for a home that you have. And again, like I said, it's something where it's the least amount of restrictions, but it's also the most responsibility of most of the other home ownership styles because you own all of that land and you own the entire entity, the entire house and everything else. If anything goes wrong with any of those things, it's on you to fix, right? If there's something in the yard, right, there's a tree or something that is causing issues with the root system, or let's say, for example, there's problems or defects or issues with your siding or something on the exterior of the home, all of those things that could happen, those are all your responsibility when you have that type of ownership style. And so it can be more expensive to have that type of ownership style. And that's one thing that you may want to consider when you're looking at it, right? Again, most people, especially first-time home buyers, usually want that type of ownership style, but that may be something where you say to yourself, I don't really want to handle that responsibility. I want something that has as little responsibility as possible. I have some clients who travel all the time and they're like, I don't want something where I'm going to have to upkeep a yard and all these other things. I want something that I can just leave sitting and have it off to the side, and I can come back and just come home and not have to worry about any of those other typical homeowner responsibilities that you have to deal with. The other thing to keep in mind is with HOAs, right? And so homeowners associations are typically entities in there of themselves that kind of, in a sense, police the neighborhood, and they're also responsible for handling a lot of the amenities that the neighborhood may or may not have to offer. With a single family home, it usually doesn't address anything with that particular yard. They usually don't handle anything with the person's yard, but they also will likely have covenants or restrictions in place which have certain guidelines or rules that you have to adhere to, right? Your grass can't get up to a certain level, or your yard can't be a certain area, or you can't have your house painted a certain color, or if you do, you have to have it approved by a committee. Like, there's all these little types of rules and things that might be in place, which is usually why a lot of people don't really like HOAs. But it's usually more difficult to get around, especially in present day. We're seeing HOAs becoming more and more popular for a lot of different communities. And so if you have a detached home, it's a chance you may have it. If you are in an area that is not in a neighborhood, or if you're in a area that tends to be a little more rural, you may not have to worry about an HOA, right? And so that's another added feature where you have a little more freedom, right? You can get those chickens, or you can get those goats in your backyard, and you're not having to worry as much about someone trying to come in and say, hey, you can't do that here. Also, if there are HOA dues, more times than not, they're usually not that expensive, right? They might be maybe 30, 40, $50 a month or something like that. Something traditional. Now, that's in our area. It could be completely different in other spaces in the country, but in the Triangle, in Raleigh and some of the surrounding cities, that's typically the type of HOA dues that we run into at the time of this recording. It gets a little more expensive once you add more amenities, right? So if you have a pool or a clubhouse or a gym, again, that money to maintain those things has to come from somewhere, and it's going to come from the homeowners through the HOA dues, right? And so those fees will gradually go up a little bit depending on what type of amenities that neighborhood offers. If all they do is just cover the common areas, right, just keep the neighborhood sign clean and water the plants and stuff like that by that area, it's really not much that you're going to see. It's very, very inexpensive to have HOA dues at that point. And so that's another added benefit. But also, when you look at the resale value of any of the four main types of homes, more times than not, especially in our area, single family detached homes are going to appreciate at a faster rate than many of the other properties that are available or out there, just because they're more popular. They appeal to a larger base of home buyers, and it's just one of the options that most people tend to be. It's more sought after, which is why, again, the appreciation rises at a faster rate. And so if possible, that may be something that you may want to consider. Again, it's not right for everyone, but that's how that particular property type works as far as ownership and responsibilities and everything go. The next one is attached. Now, this one is more so for what we call townhouses, right, or a townhome. It can be an interior unit. It could be an in unit. It could be any number of things, but that attached style, that is where you share a wall with your neighbor, right? Or with another property. We call it a party wall, where you are literally attached to that other person, right? So depending on how well it was built, you may or may not be able to hear your neighbor. I used to live in a town, or used to rent a townhouse, and sometimes, like I said, you would hear if the neighbor was yelling really loud, or they had some things going on over there, you might be able to hear it. And so unfortunately, you can't control who your neighbors are, right? So that's always one risk that you have to take, is that you're moving into a house a lot of times not knowing who you're going to be sharing a party wall with, if it's someone who's actually having a lot of parties, or if it's someone who just is constantly talking loud or watches their movies or TV shows on the highest volume possible. Like, we always have to deal with those things. But that's the attached style. Now, this ownership style with a townhouse, you still own the land that it sits on. You also own the actual property itself, right? And so that's a unique style of ownership that you have, but you own the land that it sits on and everything else. And so the ownership style is similar to detached, but the biggest difference is with these, the HOA will typically cover or address a lot of the exterior of the home, as well as the property. They'll usually maintain some parts of the grass or something like that if there's any landscaping that needs to be done in front of the home. And so it's usually a less responsibilities on your end as the homeowner, where you're not having to worry about hiring someone to fix that siding that broke or something like that. Those are things that you can usually put off on the HOA and let them know, like, hey, I had this issue. Can you get this done? There are some, it's becoming less and less common, whatever, but there are some out there that do not cover, they cover all the exterior, but they don't cover the roof. And that's a big point of contention, and definitely something you want to check on if you're interested in an attached property. Is you want to make sure, what does this HOA cover and what does it not cover? Believe it or not, like I said, even though all the units are connected, there are still a lot of situations that we're seeing where some HOAs have now said, we don't cover the roof anymore. And sometimes the HOA dues are lower, so people like that fact. But once that roof becomes due for replacement, then it's going to become an issue when it's like a lot of people are figuring out, okay, what is my particular area? My neighbors have replaced the roof, but I didn't. And now it's causing issues on their end. It's a whole mess of things that can happen. But you definitely want to check to see if that is covered. But again, that can be a huge benefit to someone who doesn't want to have to deal with the hassle of exterior maintenance or have to deal with mowing or keeping up with a massive lawn. They may say, hey, I just want something that is basic maintenance that I don't have to really deal with. Townhouse could be a good option. Now, one thing you do need to consider, though, is because the HOA does cover more with an attached property, that means that by default, the dues are going to be higher as well. The dues, I mean, it's not uncommon at all for them to be 3, 4, 5 times as much as they would be for a single family detached home. A lot of cases you might see an attached home where the HOA dues could be hundreds of dollars in some cases. It depends on where you are in the country or where you are in the area. And the triangle, it is not uncommon for us to see HOA dues for townhouses in the high 100s at the time of this recording. You might see it anywhere from $150, maybe $170 a month, depending on what it covers. Now, there are some that are a little bit lower than that, but they also cover less as well, or they're a newer community, right? So it's not like the roof is going to be coming due at any time soon. And so that's why the dues are usually a little bit lower. But for a lot of the other communities, like I said, it is not uncommon at all to see $150, $160 a month HOA dues. And those, like I said, cover all the exterior maintenance. In most cases, they cover all exterior maintenance. They cover the roof. If there's any amenities in the neighborhood, like if there's a neighborhood pool, they would also help contribute with that as well. But those are things that you do need to take into consideration, because that does impact that type of house and the price of the house that you can afford, right? And so think about it. If you come to the lender and give them all your information, usually when the lender is trying to determine what kind of house you can afford, they take all of those things into consideration, right? So they take into account the mortgage rate, the insurance, the taxes, and the HOA dues. And they want to make sure that you can afford to pay all those things in order, because if you don't pay your HOA dues, a lot of HOAs have the power to literally foreclose on that home if you don't pay them, right? And so the lender wants to make certain that you can afford to pay those dues as well as everything else that's associated with the home. And so they're going to figure out, okay, do you actually qualify to afford it? So when you first get estimates from the lender, They're going to ask what type of house you're looking for. They're going to ask what area you're looking in, right? Because they're trying to get a feel for, okay, what are the taxes going to be in that area? What are the insurance implications? What are the HOA possibilities? They're going to be factoring in all those things. And so if you tell them originally, hey, I'm looking at single family homes, they're going to be estimating lower HOA dues just by default. But if you come to them and say, hey, I changed my mind, I want to now go and look at a townhouse, or I want to go look at something else that has significantly higher HOA dues, now that is going to reduce your purchasing power. And so, again, you need to make sure that you keep that in mind. That can, like I said, take your purchasing power down thousands. You may come to them and say, hey, I found out I qualify for $300,000, a max of that. I found a townhouse that fits in that, but I can't afford it because the HOA dues are so high. And so that's definitely something that you want to take into consideration. Those dues are going to have an impact on what you can afford. Putting in that point. The other thing too, and this is more of a practical standpoint, is that with attached houses, they're usually trying to maximize the amount of properties in a particular space, right? So they're squished together, they're really tight, and by default, they most of the time tend to have stairs, especially if they're in a first-time home buyer price point. 99% of the time, those properties are going to be either 2 or 3 stories. And that means it's going to have a ton of stairs. So if you are the type of person that is looking to avoid stairs or don't want to have those, that is going to be extremely difficult in a townhouse style. Now, they do build 1-story townhouses. I've seen those out there in a lot of cases, but in our area out here, it is very uncommon for you to see those that are not priced at a higher price point, right? Most of the ones that you see at that beginner home buyer price point, more times than not, they're going to be a minimum of 2 stories high. And so that's just one practical thing to keep in mind. Now, as far as resale goes, because it's not as popular as the single family home, it may not have the same rate of value of appraising that would typically go on with this with a detached home, but it could still be a great option out there that a lot of people are interested in. And again, the pool of buyers is going to shrink, one, because some people just prefer the single family homes, but also on top of that, you also have the situations where there are some stairs, there might be affordability issues, right? There, it just shrinks the pool of buyers a little bit more. Now, if you're in an area like a big metro city or something like that up north, they are obviously going to have way more popularity with those townhouse style homes, simply for the fact that there's not a lot of inventory out there. We're still having options out there. There's still land enough in this area that people are interested in it. And so you just have to consider, okay, where you are in the country, what's most popular out there. But one of the advantages for a lot of situations where I've worked with people who are selling townhouses is that when it comes time to negotiate those repairs or certain things that are going on in the home, the repairs are usually a little bit easier. Not a ton, but a lot of times we can take some of those requests from the buyer and we can put that onto the HOA. And say, the buyer may say, hey, this vent on the roof is messed up, or hey, this siding needs to be fixed, or hey, this hose bib or something like that. There's different things on there that may be covered by the HOA, and instead of you as the homeowner having to address it, you can usually just pass it off to the HOA and you don't have to worry about it. And so more times than not, repair negotiations, which is a huge deal when you go to sell the home, those tend to be easier with homes that are attached and have more covered by the HOA. And so that's one thing that you might like. And from an investment standpoint, let's say, for example, you wanted to consider when you move up in house or when you move out of that property, instead of selling it, you may want to rent it out. And that could be another advantage to the low maintenance lifestyle that's accommodate with an attached home is that you could say, hey, I want to rent out this property, and assuming that the HOA doesn't have any rules against that, that could be a great feature where you can say, hey, I don't have to worry about as many things going wrong with the exterior of the home. I don't have to worry about yard maintenance and upkeep and all those things that I would typically have to worry if I was renting out a detached home, right? And so that's another advantage that you may want to consider when looking at those properties. The third major one is condo style ownership. Now, this one is a unique style because you technically only own, as the homeowner, you would only own the interior space of that. You would only own the airspace for that particular home. Everything on the outside, right? The exterior, the building, all that stuff is covered by the HOA. You just own the space within the walls of your home. Now, that does include the pipes, the HVAC system, all those things. Those are still covered by you as the homeowner. But everything outside of that, that is owned by the HOA, right? And so you don't even own the land technically that building sits on. You don't own that. You don't own the airspace. You don't own any of that. You don't own the common areas. You don't own anything but what is inside the walls of your particular unit. And most of them tend to be more like an apartment. Like if you think about a large apartment building, that's how most condos are typically set up. Now, every now and again, we run into situations where it is a townhouse, where it looks like a townhouse from the outside, but the ownership style is a condo, which basically means that, again, you don't own the land that it sits on. You only own the space within those walls. So that is very important to keep in mind, is that you might look at something that looks like a traditional townhouse, but you might find out that the ownership style is actually condo, which means that you don't own the land that it sits on. You only own the space within those walls. Because the HOA is responsible for more in those situations, it's going to be significantly higher. In our area, it is not uncommon at all, even for the lower priced condos, to have HOA dues $300-$400 a month in some cases, right? When you look at the luxury condos that we have downtown, those it's a mini mortgage payment for the HOA dues in those cases because, again, they cover the entire building, right? So if you have an elevator in that building, that's covered by the HOA. Any of the amenities covered by the HOA. There are some condos where they even have water and some of the utilities wrapped up into the HOA dues as well. But again, that is an extremely high HOA due fee that you have per month, but it's the least amount of maintenance that you would have to worry about as a homeowner. So that's the trade-off that you get with that style of home ownership, and you have to determine whether or not that works best for you. Again, that's some people where it's like, that's perfect, that's all I need. Some people may want a little more freedom in how they utilize that home or that area, but that is one thing to keep in mind. And again, like going back to the discussion around financing, it is going to hurt your purchasing power if you're looking at homes that have HOA dues that high, right? It's going to take it a lot lower than what you may have originally expected if you were considering detached or attached houses as well. But that's one thing you want to keep in mind. And then again, you also have to think about the resale aspect of it. Does it have any issues or problems that would cause you to be able to resell that property? And because your pool of buyers, again, is going to shrink a little bit depending on the popularity of condos in your particular area. If condos are all the rage and that's the best option that's available, it might not hurt as much. But in areas like ours where condos are kind of up and coming but haven't really taken over yet, it may be more difficult for you to sell depending on what area you're in or get people to buy into that, especially if there's not a ton of amenities or shopping and malls and all these things around wherever that particular property is located. The other thing too is that there's also rules around the financing, right? There's some times where the mortgage lender may say, hey, only a certain number of these units can be rented out. If it's a certain percentage, we may not be able to give you financing on this one, right? I think about even the structure of the condominium. You think about the collapse that happened in Miami, Florida, the condo out there in 2021, that caused a lot of issues where they were now requiring structural inspections to be done as well before they would even sign off on a lot of these. And so, again, with condos, you are all interconnected, and that could be an issue that you keep in mind. And the last one I want to talk about is the manufactured. I'm not going to go into detail, but I'll just touch on it. Manufactured homes are the ones that are built remotely and then are brought to a certain location, right? And so the biggest question with a manufactured home is it on a permanent foundation? That's going to be one of the key things to keep in mind for the lender. If you're getting financing on those homes, they want to know, is it on a permanent foundation? If it's not, it's going to be basically just a mobile home, and you're going to have a difficult time getting financing on those properties, or at least traditional financing on those properties. The ownership style is still essentially the same as a detached home, right? You still own the land that it sits on. You own the ground underneath. You own the airspace. You own all of that. So the ownership style is different. I'm sorry, not different, but it's similar. But with a manufactured home, you are having to worry about the potential resale value, right? They don't tend to increase in value as quickly as a site-built detached house. Now, a lot of times they usually tend to be in more rural areas. They also tend to be a one-story home, and so it can be appealing to a large pool of buyers, but it's not always as popular, or it doesn't tend to hold its value the same way as a site-built home, and there could be potential issues with financing. So those are just things to keep in mind. Again, everybody is different in what they're looking for and how they're focusing on things. But with the inventory issues that we're running into and affordability, there's a lot of people who are having to look at a multitude of different options to see if there's anything out there that works for them. And I want to make sure that you have a firm understanding of how these different ownership styles work and these different properties, and figure out what works best for you. I'm always happy to talk with anyone about helping determine what's the best option and what things they need to keep in mind, because that was just scratching the surface. But I hope that was helpful for you guys. As always, I'm here to help in any way that I can and be a resource in helping you achieve your home ownership goals. Have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you guys next week.